So we'll just get started. I'm going to welcome you, David Roberts, to What's on Your Plate podcast. Dave became a parent who experienced the death of a child when his daughter, Jeannine, died of cancer. He is a retired addiction professional and adjunct professor in the Psychology Child Life Department at Utica University in Utica, New York. Dave also teaches psychology classes at Pratt Munson School of Art and Design. He is the host of the Teaching Journeys podcast, which can be found on most podcast platforms and on YouTube. Amongst his other accomplishments, which there are many, and they will be in the show notes, but he is also the co-author of a book with Reverend Patty Farino titled When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. Welcome, Dave. I am just thrilled to have you in this space today.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much just for agreeing to share the space, to share the mic. I always love it, especially when I get to do so with a fellow podcaster. And I just feel like that always just makes for a better experience for everybody because you've been in these spaces before.
Mm-hmm. And I also know the editing woes that many podcasters go through, particularly with the poor quality recording. So I wanted to make sure I did my sound checks and did my checklist as if I were actually hosting the podcast. So hopefully we have a good, nice, smooth edit and everything goes well.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it's going to be just amazing and well received by all that listen to it. And just based on our meet and greet conversation, I know that there is just going to be a wealth of inspiring knowledge that you leave in this space. And, as a bit of a teaser there and a bit of a just glimpse into what we're going to be talking about, we are here today because you have suffered something really hard in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Your
Yeah.
daughter, Jeannine, 18 years young, transitioned, and you have really done a lot for your own healing from that. You have become and transformed yourself into somebody different because of that experience and are helping other people who are struggling with something similar now that that is something that you have had in your path in life. Tell us
I,
about Jeannine.
well, um, there's a lot to unpeel with Jeannine. She was a very multi-layered young lady. She's the middle child. I have one younger son and one younger son. I have my older son Dan, my youngest son Matt, and I have to give a shout out to two very fine young men who also came through some very adverse circumstances and thrived as a result of the challenges with those circumstances. They are successful in their own right, and I'm very proud of both of them. And Jeannine was the middle child in between her older and younger brother. Um, she was a person that had a smile that could light up a room. She was very honest with and transparent with what she believed, never disrespectful. But Sarah, if you asked her a question, she'd give you an honest answer. You might not have liked the answer, but it was true to her beliefs. And one of the things I've discovered is that individuals who are outliers, who defy conventional wisdom or believe conventional wisdom is overrated, as my daughter did, they tend to become targets for other individuals who don't understand that type of transparency. But she handled everything in her life with grace, with passion. Um, she was the apple of my eye. I mean, she could smile at me, and she would, loosen my wallet, lighten my wallet. She would pretty much get anything she wanted out of me. Um, and I admit I was an easy mark, but once she smiled, that was it. She had me. Um, and obviously, when she got sick, and as I call it now, transitioned, a lot of other individuals will see, a person leaving their physical body as death or passing on or passing away. Um, I'll work with anybody with their vocabulary of death, but for me, At this stage in my grief, she transitioned from the physical world into the spiritual world as part of the divine source of energy, of eternal energy. So that's how I see this now. Um, but yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about her, but she was she was special. She had to confront her mortality at an age nobody should have had to confront their mortality at. She did it with grace. She did it with resilience, and she taught me to be resilient in the process, just through the process of witnessing her um, working through the challenges that were presented by her illness. And the other thing that is a part of the story is that she transitioned 10 months after giving birth to her only daughter and my first grandchild, Brianna. Brianna is now 22 years old, and she has two children of her own, two girls. And so now I'm a great grandfather, which we can add to the category of other categories that are a part of my existence.
That is a lot to say right out the gate, I will say. Um, but thank you for giving us a glimpse of Jeannine and just who she was and how she absolutely sounds like she lit you up and made you smile.
Yeah. I know one of the things we talked about is that you asked me about a story that would kind of help your listeners understand who Jeannine is. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a couple. I'm actually going to give you two stories, two very brief stories. One pre-illness and one right after she was diagnosed, to give you an idea of the strength, the compassion, everything that was a part of who my daughter is. And I say is because I believe she is still with me, but yet in a different form of energy. Um, the first story is I remember when she was 15, we were walking in our local mall, and that was one of the fun things we used to do. We used to go to the mall window shop, and she saw this necklace. It was, I think it had to be, Sarah, $50 at the time. She would have been 40 years old now, so this was 25 years ago. And it was engraved with Daddy's little girl. And she looked at me and she said, "You're getting that for me for Christmas." And I said, "Oh, really?" Well, I said, "Do you think I'm made of money?" And so we started laughing. And of course, that's what I got her for Christmas. Okay, was that necklace. And when we buried her, we buried her with that necklace. Um, so that's the one thing. She could just just with a smile and a little playfulness, she knew I was gonna, she knew I was gonna get that necklace for her. In fact, when she tried to ask her mother for money, her mother said, "No, I don't have any money." She goes, "That's all right. I'll ask Dad. I'll give it to me." And 9 times out of 10, she got money out of me because she knew I would. She just knew I would give it to her. The other story is really to tell you what her attitude was after she was immediately diagnosed. Um, we had gone to the Dana-Farber Institute. This was June 2nd of 2002. She had previously been diagnosed by our local oncologist as having a type of cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a connective muscle tissue cancer, and the most aggressive of the sarcomas. Sarcomas at the time, Sarah, constituted about 2,500 of any new cancer diagnoses per year, so approximately 3 to 4% of any new cancer diagnosis. So it was rare in and of itself, and rare to this area. In the area where I live, which is a little burg called Whitesboro, New York, which is a suburb of Utica, New York, in upstate New York, we're very versed in prostate cancer, colon cancer, and breast cancer. But sarcomas, at that time, there was no specialist here that had dealt with it. So they referred us to Dana-Farber, which is, again, one of the best hospitals in the country for pediatric sarcoma treatment and research. Um, on June 2nd, we had a 5-minute consultation with the oncologist, who was a brilliant oncologist. She also taught part-time at the Harvard School of Medicine. And in a 5-minute consult, she said, "Your daughter has a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. And at stage 4, it was total metastasis. It spread to her bone marrow, lymph node, her bones, everything." And she said there is no cure for her cancer. The only hope we have is traditional chemotherapy and aggressive chemotherapy to put it into remission until we could find a cure. So at that moment in time, what I heard and what my daughter heard is the tears were streaming down her face was that unless there's a miracle, you're going to die and your daughter's going to die. Um, so we drove home from Boston. It was about a 5 hour drive, and I had this old 1993 Jeep Cherokee. And again, this Jeep that I had wasn't smooth on bumps, and Jeannine was in a lot of pain. So every bump that I hit, I tried going over it slow. I tried going over it fast. She screamed out in pain. So I got home, and she was in the living room, and at the time we had her significant other, my granddaughter Brianna, my sons Dan and Matt, my wife Sherry, me, her cat, my two cats living under the same roof in just one level ranch. And we did that because her significant other said, "Look, I can't go to school, I can't work, and I can't take care of you. We need help." So we all moved in together. But everybody was doing something else. They were gone for that moment. And at that moment, when I saw her sitting on the couch, I collapsed in her lap and cried like a baby. Okay, literally, it just cried and it cried and cried. I never cried that hard before, and I don't think I've cried that hard since. And I looked at her and I said, "I'm sorry that my driving caused you so much pain." And she looked at me, she goes, "Dad, I was only yelling because I was in so much pain." She goes, "I'll tell you what, if you have trouble sleeping at night, you come and wake me up and we'll talk." Now, this is a young lady who was dying, and she's comforting me, okay? And she's comforting me. And I looked at that and I said, I learned my first lesson about the resilience of the human spirit from her. I figured, and she told me, she goes, "Dad, I'm not going down without a fight." And I kind of figured if she wasn't going down without a fight, neither was I. And her strength of looking death square in the eye, square in the face, and right directly in the eye gave me the strength to be present for her illness. So those are two stories that I wanted to share. And I think will give you an idea of her playfulness and also her toughness and her resilience.
Thank you for sharing that, Dave. It's hard to not get emotional even through the screen when you're sharing about that last part in particular. It's just amazing to me, those moments where we're reminded that we're not necessarily the ones that do the primary teaching in life to our children. Our children teach us so much about life and death and grief.
Yeah.
And that was very evident in how Jeannine responded to your tears and to you being upset in that moment.
The mantra of my podcast is we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. And I tell my students at both Utica University and Pratt Munson School of Art, hopefully I'm not too old for you to learn from me, and you're not too young for me to learn from you. Um, I think within every great student is a great teacher. They just need to believe that that part of them exists. And I think as educators, we need to be able to nurture and support and encourage that part to develop.
Absolutely. I love that. If everybody could just remain humble and out
Mhm.
of their egos a little bit, I think that we would all meet each other much closer in the middle with things like learning from each other.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I know one of the things we talked about during pre-chat was like the 3 or 4 dates
Hmm.
that can indicate that just life can turn on a dime. So if you're okay with that, I'll just go into that as part of the story.
That was
Um,
absolutely what I was going to ask you about next, so please do.
oh, good. Do you want to talk about serendipity, synchronicity, or just being in sync? That's a perfect example of that. So,
Absolutely.
and serendipity has taught me a lot about the meaning of life and about cause and effect and a lot of different things. And I've learned to celebrate the serendipity in my life amidst everything else. But on May 2nd, my granddaughter Brianna was born, May 2nd, 2002. So I'm celebrating being a grandfather for the first time.
Mhm.
And knowing that Jeannine had a significant other that I knew was going to take good care of her. Um, May 19th, I believe. No, excuse me, let's go back. Um, May 19th, I got word that I had completed the requirements for my master's in social work degree from SUNY Albany. Char you know, capping 25 years of an educational journey. Okay. May 26th, following a biopsy that she had had a couple of weeks after she was pregnant, or a couple of weeks after she delivered Brianna, excuse me, we discovered that she had had a stage 4 Avelia rhabdomyosarcoma, with the primary site being her foot. She had an 8 centimeter malignant tumor at the bottom of her foot, and she had injured her foot during a freak accident during pregnancy. Her podiatrist wanted to do an MRI and do a biopsy sooner, but she declined because she wanted to wait till after her child was born. Um, May 26th, the diagnosis gets confirmed. Locally, June 2nd, we're essentially given a death sentence for my daughter by her oncologist at Dana-Farber. So you look at the space of a month, Sarah. I go from the exhilaration of being a grandparent, completing my graduate degree, completing the requirements for that, and then all of a sudden finding myself thrust into a very unfamiliar place of being an emotional caregiver for a terminally ill adult child. So I tell anybody that listens, life can turn on a dime. Don't take any day for granted. Be grateful for the day that you have, that you're alive, that you're intact, that your family members are intact, that nobody's hurt, nobody's maimed. Be grateful for that because you just never know.
Thinking about what you shared prior to just those 4 dates and about how really things were aligning and falling into place for your granddaughter to be with you, that is not an accident. The universe knew, I feel like, that there was a reason that everybody was already under the same house, under the same roof, in the same household. There was a reason that things were arranged like that because it needed to be for everybody to probably survive that in their own way, the loss of somebody so important and so just so important in your family.
Mhm. And I think you're right. We had all come together to support each other. Her significant other was as much of a vital caretaker to Jeannine as my wife was, and my younger son Matt was at 13. He assumed some of the responsibility for just helping Jeannine with certain things that she couldn't do. Um, and I was more of the emotional caregiver, and that's where I fit in. And I think it took an entire group, an entire community, family community, to support each other and to support her through her cancer battle. And yeah, and I think, and the other thing that really I always like to give a shout out to her former significant other, who is now married and has children of his own, is that he had made a promise to Jeannine that he would not uproot Brianna from our home for at least 4 years until she was ready to go to kindergarten. And this young man lived in the country. I mean, so he was country boy, country living, and it was an adjustment for him, moving into a rural suburb into just a split level ranch with about a half acre of land when he was used to having acres and acres of land to run in on his family's property. So he made that adjustment. He made that sacrifice for her, for Jeannine, for his granddaughter, and actually for us, because he kept his promise. He stayed for 4 years. And after he left, he made sure that we still saw Brianna regularly. And a lot of times, grandparents who are in that situation don't have the opportunity, or they're denied the right to see their grandchild for a variety of different reasons.
Right. I imagine that's true. And thankfully for you, that wasn't the reality. But Dave, I'd love to hear you talk about that intermingling of grief and joy. You had something to absolutely celebrate and be thankful for at the same time you were losing one of the most important people of your life.
Yeah, I think in early grief, I kind of saw that as being an injustice that I would have to experience joy and sadness so quickly,
Yeah.
especially after achieving, the pinnacle of educational success for me by getting my master's degree and
Hmm.
becoming a grandfather. There was a sense of, life isn't fair. I had lived my life implicitly or explicitly that if I lived an honorable life, if I didn't cheat on my wife, if I was a good father, if I worked hard, that somehow I would be unscathed from the grim realities of life. But as I've come to learn, life isn't fair. We're in this lifetime. We are in any lifetime, we're going to be confronted with our share of challenges. And, we're given a life. We're not given a good or bad life. And whether it's good or bad is up to us. And it's how we transcend those challenges that determine the quality and the legacy that we leave. And um, so for me, and for me, I've had a chance for 22 years to reflect and to grow through grief. Um, Grief is a microcosm of life in general. Even without grief, there's joy, there's sadness, there's anger. It's just substituted a different challenge for that, or a different transition for that. If we deny those parts of our existence that aren't happiness, we're denying a part of our existence that could allow us to become genuine. Nobody wants to experience sadness, Sarah. Nobody, I'm sure, wants to experience anger or confusion or disillusionment, but it's all part of the human experience. Um, I tell everybody, I tell my students, I tell anybody, listen, I don't hang around with just people who see happiness as the sole key to success. People who are happy 24/7 and tell you they're happy 24/7 usually aren't happy. And they do that because they either believe that it's a stigma to express anything other than happiness because society wants us to be super happy and productive, or that's just around the whole stigma for asking for help or companionship, which is asking for help is stigmatized in the society in many ways. When you talk about mental health, when you talk about addiction, but for me, is that once I learned to embrace the totality of who I was able to integrate my grief more effectively because there's a lot to learn from every emotion that we experience. And you just let those emotions drink you up. You sit with it, you write it out, and then you say, what did I learn from this? Even if you learn that you can survive a tough moment, a lot of times our innate will to survive will help us thrive. But we have to value survival first in order to get to the thriving part. Because
Absolutely.
early grief in many ways is a lot about survival, particularly the second year. And if we had an audience, there might be a live audience, or it might be some of the audience who would throw something at me for saying this, but I have to say it anyway. A lot of times in our society, individuals believe that grief may be time limited. After a year, you put your grief in a box, you bury it, you move on as if nothing happened. But the second year, in many cases, is more challenging than the first year because the second year, kind of the reality of the first year hits in, and you realize that this is my life moving forward. My daughter isn't going to be physically a part of it anymore. My wife isn't going to be physically a part of it anymore. If the loss is a spouse, grandparent, you can substitute any specific type of loss for that. But the first year is kind of surreal, and there's a level of shock that still remains. I mean, the first year I thought my daughter would just walk in the door and say, "Dad, just kidding." And I thought somebody, whether it be God or somebody who was in charge of the universe, would come down, Say, Dave, we made a mistake. We've reviewed your life. You have lived an honorable life. You did not deserve to have your daughter taken away from you. We're going to give you your life back as you knew it. Well, and that didn't happen, and it wasn't going to happen. But a year to a day that Jeannine transitioned, the reality of what I was facing sat in, and it sucked. It really sucked because now there was emptiness in addition to the pain of losing her and not having her physical presence, and then feeling empty because I'm thinking, this is going to be my life moving forward, and that's where I was at.
Well, I think you shared something really important in that in even though you have come as far as you have with your grief, you are still here living this human experience just like
Mm,
everybody else.
mm,
Um, and we haven't really got into that part of it yet, the spiritual transformation that you have experienced personally and embracing grief like a friend,
hmm.
which is also something I feel like a lot of people don't want to hear. They don't like the idea of that, as if you're supposed to befriend something that is uncomfortable or hard. But I think that, as you've described earlier in this conversation, without it, we're not fully we're not fully here for our lives. It's like if you don't ever have bad days, you really can't appreciate the good ones.
Oh, absolutely. And we are going to have bad days. It's a part of the human experience. And the human experience is messy. The human experience is at times very, very tough. And not just because of catastrophic loss, just in general, for a lot of different reasons. You could
Absolutely.
take a look at what's going on in the world globally. You can take a look at just the day-to-day challenges that families face, paying bills and financial challenges and just the stresses of raising teenagers. All of that makes the human experience at times very difficult.
But you've gotten to the point in your journey where grief is
Hmm.
something like a friend to you.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of weird that I'd even be saying this to you now. If somebody said I'd be saying that 2 years into my grief, I would have, I was an addictions counselor, back then, and I would have said, well, I'm going to drug test you right now, because how can I make friends with something that's so painful? But my grief, one of the reasons I was, I think, able to make friends with my grief was the support that I got from other parents who were going through the same challenges. Once I found a bereaved parent support group, actually, I didn't find it. My wife Sherry found this group 6 months after Jeannine had transitioned. Um, I was able to share my grief and my pain and get support for that and get tools for that, I realized that our shared pain could become a gateway to hope that we could learn to re-engage in life with meaning and purpose without the physical presence of our children. So, and one of the best lines in the movie, The Fault of Our Stars, and the book, The Fault of Our Stars by John Green, is both the protagonists in this movie have cancer and they fall in love with each other. Um, the male protagonist says pain demands to be felt. And that always stuck with me. If we try to outrun pain or suppress pain and we don't make friends with that and we don't try to work through it, we don't invite it in as a part of our journey so we can learn from it, we're going to be like that dog chasing its proverbial tail after they've gotten bit. They're going to try to outrun their pain and outrun the pain, and then eventually they're just going to collapse because they have no more energy to deal with that. And I've learned that emotions are transient, emotional states are transient. We can work through those. Beliefs tend to be more permanent because they're reinforced by behavior, but our emotions tend to be transient, and we can work through that if we allow that. And if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to experience everything that is part of the human experience. And I think that's how we can get through any type of a challenge. The other thing, and it was interesting. Before we recorded today, I was watching a couple of different Hallmark family movies, and I'm not usually a fan of Hallmark movies, but this one movie that I watched, I think, was called Duke, and it was about a disabled veteran who leaves his sick dog at a veterinary clinic. He's a homeless veteran, couldn't thought the dog had died. And eventually, well, I don't want to spoil it, but it was a happy ending in the end, as with most Hallmark movies. But there were father-daughter moments in that movie that I could have avoided, but I teared up, especially when the daughter became reunited with his father, and when the dog be, became reunited with his master. I just spoiled the movie, um, but it's still a great story, and I'd watch it even though I just gave you all these spoiler alerts. But the thing is he this is a guy who was so down on his luck and so down on himself, and I remember being that way, particularly in the early stages of my grief with Jeannine, when I had so much guilt over why didn't I see the signs of her cancer sooner? Why couldn't I have talked her into a clinical trial? Why was I so oblivious to what was going on during her pregnancy? I was held myself hostage to the feeling that I let my family down because I didn't protect them from what had happened. I didn't protect them from going through the pain of losing their daughter, losing their sister. And I held myself hostage to this for a long time. So I would remember being down on my luck and then having people lift me up. And so when I saw that, I mean, the tears just streamed down my face. Now, I could have easily avoided that, but a lot of times I will put myself in situations where I know I'm going to tear up just so that I can experience those feelings and know that I'm a feeling human being, and knowing that the love that I have for my daughter, the love that I have for my ancestors that predeceased her, and those people that have transitioned after her, that it tells me that I can still feel at a very deep, visceral level. And before I would try to avoid that, now I will put myself in situations where those emotions can be experienced. Because 22 years later, I know that it's part of the deal, and I know that I can learn from that as well too. And shedding tears is very cleansing. Um, Now, if I said this to you in early grief, you probably would have thought somebody else had crawled into my body. Or I never thought I would have said this in 2 years down the road. I'm saying this now, that I don't avoid it. I realize that there's going to be good and bad days, and the bad days can teach me as much as the good. And I learned that it's all got something to teach me, and I can get in touch with it all, and everything is valuable now. Not just the happy times. It's also those bad moments that make me who I am and make us who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you were able to sit with that emotion. I think it takes a lot of work for somebody to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to do that for a multitude of reasons, right? It's painful, it's scary, it feels shameful, even maybe at times, for people to allow that energy to be moved through
Mhm.
showing emotion. But the moment we do, right, it's, I feel like the best way to take care of ourselves, the best way to continue to move along with the grief, even if not through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of times individuals will equate vulnerability with weakness. I equate vulnerability with strength. It's
Mhm.
being able to recognize that there's a person that's in my path at this particular point that can help me get through a particular feeling. And I'm going to open up enough because I trust them enough that they're going to handle that with dignity. They're going to handle they're going to hold space for me with honor. And I can feel comfortable doing that. Does that mean I have to engage in a long-term relationship with them? Absolutely not. There are these transient angels that come into our lives for moments in time that can help us get through a particular moment. So, but at that moment, if I can feel vulnerable with somebody who I think can help me put a voice to my feelings, help me understand my feelings, bear witness to it, that's what vulnerability is about. And being able to recognize who we can be that transparent with in the moment without fear of getting hurt.
And I think that's the big part of it, what you said at the end there. The fear of being hurt is not something that most of us seek out.
No.
The idea of being hurt or remaining hurt. Dave, I would love to hear you talk about, we've referenced a couple times in this conversation if you had said 2 years into my grief, this would look a lot different. What changed for you? What happened during your journey that helped you move past the mourning and embrace the grief?
Okay. There were little nudges that I had along the way. There were people in early grief who had served a specific purpose in helping me get to the point that we're gonna talk about. But initially, it was a support of other individuals, other parents who had experienced a transition or death or passing on of their children. It was other individuals along the way who did plant some seeds for different perspectives to be to be developed. Um, but 7 years after Jeannine transitioned, this was in 2010, I was one of the conference organizers for a conference that we had locally called Beyond Words, Creative Approaches to Addressing Grief. And I was driving three individuals, our speakers, a day after the conference, who were friends of mine and who were all very instrumental in getting me to that point. They're driving them up north so that they could see the change of leaves. In upstate New York, the scenery is gorgeous in the Adirondacks. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to see that. So they're having this intense spiritual conversation in the back of the car. And all of a sudden, I looked up to the universe. And I think in retrospect, Sarah, my soul knew what my mind and brain didn't recognize. I looked up in the sky and said, I want to be where they are. And all I wanted was to have some increased knowledge of spirituality to get me to the next step. Because my soul must have felt I was kind of like stuck in neutral and needed to move on. So previously, and I got to backtrack a little bit, I'm going to try to condense this story as much as I can because there's a lot of serendipity and there's a lot of layers to it. On August 25th, I received a call from a woman by the name of Reverend Patty Farina from Long Island, who was interested in the conference. Now we had registration online, but she had to call me to register because what happened is as she was putting in her choices for workshops online and checking her credit card information, her computer blacked out. The internet kind of blacked out for a few minutes. And she did just after she hit the submit button. So she was worried that the registration didn't go through. She called me. I picked up the phone because I was the contact person. So we had a conversation for about 45 minutes. I found out that she was a volunteer minister at the Angel of Hope in Long Island, which was part of Angela's house in Long Island. And the Angel of Hope is a statue that is erected in honor of children who have transitioned, and parents will come to honor their children. There are bricks with their child's name at birth, at death. Um, and so she was companioning a lot of the parents there. So, and she had asked me, she goes, do you believe in science? And I said, Patty, I really don't buy into that. I'm science-based. I believe in the here and now and the physical world. But I said, I think my daughter sent me a double rainbow once. It was Father's Day 2009. And she did. My wife was outside. She goes, Dave, you got to see this. I think your daughter sent you a double rainbow. And it was amazing because there was no rain. It hadn't rained, but there was a double rainbow across the sky. So, and the thing is, sir, I had some things that were happening to me that I was questioning, but I couldn't quite integrate it. I had a butterfly once when I was walking Brianna, uh, follow me around the block. I'd hear a song on the radio that my daughter and I liked when I was thinking of her, and I was saying, geez, maybe these are signs, but I couldn't reconcile that totally with my science-based background. So, um, basically, to fast forward, I had agreed with Patty if I saw her at the conference, we'd give her a hug. So she gave me a hug, and she goes, "And I think your daughter sent me a rainbow." And I'm thinking, I'm wiped out, Sarah, from doing the conference planning. We had a great conference, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, yeah, great, okay, and another sign, and that's what I was thinking. But I was just so tired at that particular moment. I didn't even the gravity of what she said didn't hit me until later. But come to find out, on September 3rd, okay, about a week before the conference, her and her husband were taking a trip. Her and her husband Marco were taking a trip to New Jersey for I think it was their wedding anniversary. They came back, and on Route 17 in New Jersey, they saw this rainbow, double rainbow going across the sky. Now her husband was just like, he goes, Pat, we got to stop. We got to videotape this. I can't believe this. It wasn't raining, nothing. So Patty was videotaping it. And then all of a sudden, she told me, she goes, I heard a voice in my head saying, I need you to talk to my father. And she said, okay, but who is your father? She goes, it's the guy you talked to about the conference. So what this led to was Patty telling me that if you ever get to my Long Island, I'll show you my Long Island. You can stay with me and my husband. And it turned out in November, on November 10th, there was a conference that a then colleague of ours was a workshop presentation that he was doing. And I wanted to go, so I called her and I said, can you give me any good hotels to stay? Because I didn't want to intrude on him. She goes, look, I'm going to pick you up at the airport and you can stay with us. And I wanted to make sure. I asked several hundred times whether or not her husband was going to be okay with a strange man staying in their house that he'd never met. It turns out he was very welcoming, very laid back, and very supportive and he didn't know what was about to happen, nor did I. But after the conference at 9:30, we came back. She said, get comfortable. We went into our sacred space, her sacred space, which had a fireplace, dream catchers, all types of spiritual literature. And that entire weekend, what had happened was it convinced me that our consciousness survives. I was convinced that my daughter was alive and well in another dimension, was and could connect with me, and I could connect with her and learn to transform the relationship with her by having a relationship with her spirit as opposed to with her physical body. When I met Patty, I mean, I was getting these nuggets that were being deposited and being planted. But when I met Patty, it was like the proverbial cherry on the ultimate chocolate or ice cream sundae going on top that just unleashed a whole level of curiosity for me. We would have marathon conversations for 3 or 4 hours at a time. My wife was working evenings at the time, and her husband was playing softball, and he's a very good pool player, so he was in some organized pool leagues, and we talked for hours. And she would plant ideas in my head and seeds in my head and perspectives to look at. I'd call her back, and I said, I think this spirituality stuff can really work. I think I can integrate the two worlds. I see what you're talking about. And from then, it was just I was able to find peace, not only with the weekend that I had in Long Island, with that spiritually transformative experience, but also through the subsequent conversations. And she also encouraged me to, find a variety of different teachers other than her, which I have. And we share what I share with her, what I learned from those teachers. And we still, and that was it. And then eventually I had I had bugged her for about 10 years. I said, Pat, we ought to write a book about which people need to know what you did for me. They need to know the story. They need to know what we've learned. So finally, during the pandemic, she had moved out to South Carolina with her husband by then. We used Google Docs and we put together one, the psychology professor met the minister, self-published it on Amazon. We rolled out the book on March 1st, 2021. March 1st is the anniversary date of my daughter's transition. And the book is about not only the spiritually transformative experience, but how psychology and spirituality can merge to help individuals gain a greater understanding of the world, transcend challenge, and the importance of critical thinking for present and future generations. So I think there's a little bit for everybody. Plus, the other thing is the work that learning to transform the relationship with Jeannine through Patty's guidance and ongoing conversations helped me do ancestral healing with a father who had abandoned me at 5 years of age and a mother who I was angry at for overprotecting the heck out of me after he left. And because I was able to, she facilitated the spiritually transformative experience, encouraged me to do ongoing work with Jeannine. That that translated or generalized again with her assistance and another spiritual teacher that I have that allowed me to find peace with my father's decision to leave and my mother's decision to overprotect me. So all of that work with Jeannine led to widespread healing at a variety of different levels and peace.
Dave, I just feel like you're, I mean, everything that you came to understand during that transformative experience with Patty really helped you know that you didn't have to lose the relationship with your daughter,
Mm,
for one. But then to go a step further with it and heal things from past generations, I just feel like there's so much there that happened for you. And, unfortunately, losing the physical earthly version of your daughter was what was the catalyst for all of that.
yep. Yeah.
But so much happened for you.
And it did. One of the things that Patty had asked me during that weekend, she goes, "Do you believe in past lives? And are you familiar with Brian Weiss?" And I had read Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters, about 3 years into my daughter's 3 years into my grief with journey with my daughter. And I read the book, and it was a great story. It was fascinating, but it didn't resonate with me. After that weekend, I reread it again, and it was like all the tumblers, everything kind of like fell into place. I said, I get it now. I see what Patty was talking about, what she was communicating to me, communicating about what she was encouraging me um, to 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 look at, with the assistance, obviously, of Jeannine and other wise spirits who had transcended during that time. And when I read Brian Weiss's book, I said, "Yeah, this makes sense." The book, Many Lives, Many Masters, he was he's a psychiatrist, and he ran into an individual in his clinical practice in Florida. He was I think he was a director of the University of Miami clinical hospital at the time. Woman who, through regression hypnosis, and I'm jumping ahead, found out that her soul had 86 incarnations into the physical experience. 13 of those incarnations were impacting her issues that she had with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And he recorded all of those sessions under hypnosis, played it back for her, and she ended up, and he said later in the book, she had an aura about her of peace. She drew people to her. It was like all of what he did with past life regression and replaying those past lives and the instances that occurred and the challenges that were contributing in this lifetime just gave her so much insight to move through and to address and heal from her current life transgressions. And so I've come to believe that, I think our soul has done this many times. You've heard the expression, "Jesus seemed like an old soul." Well, there may be a reason for that, is that soul might have lived, centuries before, and and has acquired that wisdom from past incarnations that they bring into this current incarnation. So it just, like I said, opened up a whole new world for me. Um, where now I integrate spirituality concepts. We talk about the spirituality of death and death, dying, and bereavement. I teach a Care of the Human Spirit course where we talk about how science can support, um, the the uh, the impact and the um, what's the word I'm looking for? The benefit that spiritual and holistic practices have on both physical and mental health. So, um, if anybody told me 22 years ago that this would be the path my life would take, I would have looked at them cross-eyed. But now, this is not a path that I ever dreamed I'd embrace, that I ever willingly embraced, but it's the path now that I'm on, and I've discovered a lot of blessings. I've discovered a lot of meaning in my life, and I've met a lot of great people along the way who have been supportive. And at this point, I'm at peace with my life. I have many blessings in my life, but there are days, grief never ends. We still grieve to an extent every day in our lives. There are days that I still yearn for my daughter's physical presence. And there are days that I am sad because she's not here. But I also understand that it's part of the grief experience, and I know how to manage it. I know how to sit with it. I know how to not resist it. And I know how to make friends with it now.
Mhm.
and integrate it.
Dave, you had said something earlier in this conversation about the idea that if you did all the things right, if you did what you were quote unquote supposed to do and what was expected, like the bad things wouldn't come into your life and good things would happen. Knowing what you know now about how that isn't how it works, um, would you give your opinion about the concept of soul contracts
Oh, yeah.
and how that is something that people believe to be sort of chosen by you
Mhm.
prior to being here in this earthly form?
I am a firm believer that soul contracts are a valid phenomenon. And Brian Weiss learned about soul contracts in his work with Catherine. What he would do during regression hypnosis is that once he regressed her to a previous lifetime, he would advance her to the moment of her death. And he said her soul would go into an incubation period where it would there'd be rest periods in between lifetimes, and her soul would channel wise wisdoms from what he called master spirits. Um, One of the things he learned, and I got to share this just to give more for those skeptics out there, and skeptics are good. I would rather deal with skeptics than debunkers who just debunk any information that doesn't it doesn't align with their core belief system without investigating it first. But Brian Weiss's son died of a congenital heart defect at 2 years of age. During one of the incubation periods, Catherine was channeling through a master spirit something to the effect that your son died of a back because he had a backwards heart, and his heart was, I think, born. His ventricles were backwards, and the master spirit said your son needed to die, and I'm paraphrasing this, because you needed to understand the limitations of Western medicine. So that for that his son and Brian Weiss, that was his son's contract. In 2 years, he was going to transition, and his transition was going to help his father understand the limitations of Western medicine and embrace his role as one of the probably the greatest spiritual and integrative teachers of our time. And he talked about soul contracts in his book, where there's a group of souls that will contract with each other for the experiences that they're going to have over lifetimes. Like, for example, me and my wife in a previous lifetime could have contracted to be brother and sister, but we
Mhm.
decided in this lifetime that we were going to be parents, and we contracted, our souls contracted prior to coming in, which families we were going to born into, which ethnicity we were going to be, how many kids we were going to have, um, the challenges we were going to experience, everything, and all for the evolution of our soul. So, from a soul contract perspective, could I have contracted to become a bereaved parent and to become a parent who experienced their worst nightmare? In retrospect, I believe that that happened for me, that I had to have this experience. And there's a reason, and I'd have to dovetail to another session that I had with another spiritual teacher. If we have some time, I can do that quickly to show the connection.
Sure,
Uh,
absolutely.
to show the connection. In addition, we also, Weiss has said, and other spiritual teachers who have done soul contracts, we contract for the number of years that we're going to do this. Okay. So in human law, let's say Jeannine contracted to be my daughter for 18 years. One of the things I found out from Patty was that we had had such a previously great relationship in a previous lifetime through Patty's conversations that we were contracted to be father and daughter in this lifetime. But when she got sick, the contract changed, and she needed to go into to spirit to show me that love exists on the other side. So that was a part of all of this. Um, Now, had my soul, if I had known that my soul had contracted for this, I would have looked up to the sky and said, "What the hell was I thinking? What was my soul thinking?" Because who the heck can? in human through human law would want to, oh yeah, I want to be a bereaved parent, but our souls contracted for that. So that our challenges could not only help us lead a more meaningful human experience, but for the evolution of our souls. And when I looked at that, I said, if we contracted, we were going to do this for 18 years. If I truly buy into that, I really shouldn't feel any guilt over what happened. I wouldn't have changed the outcome anyway, because this was our contract. This was our predestined contract. Now, there's a lot of flexibility within a soul contract because the human experience could dictate changes with that. But if we contracted that this was going to be the number of years, or that contract changed because of her developing an illness that we had no idea was going to occur, how could I or any parent who believed in soul contracts have any guilt over that? Wouldn't have changed the outcome anyway. What I've learned is that I had 18 amazing years with a pretty amazing young lady. And that's the sacred law interpretation. Human law says 18 years isn't enough time. Sacred law says that 18 years was enough time for her to um, learn lessons her soul needed to learn, have the impact that she had on the people that she was going to meet in this incarnation of her life, and then go on to her new experience. Now, I work with a shamanistic holistic practitioner by the name of Susan Roback, and I've worked with her for several years. Very much like Patty, she's just very connected to the multidimensional universe, very connected to spirit. Um, During this was back, I think, in the mid 2000s. I had a session with her. I was upset and told her I was upset. I was angry because my mother overprotected me after my father died. She wouldn't let me experience life. There's a lot of different things. Then the next session after that, she put me on the table and did a soul journey. And she said, what I saw was a 4-year-old boy driving with his father, his passenger in a chariot with his father, either in Egyptian or Roman times. And that the chariot tipped over, killing the young boy. So I sat home and I reflected on this. I said, wait a minute. I just had a conversation about my mother's overprotectiveness. Susan sees a 4-year-old dying in another lifetime. Said, what if that 4-year-old was me? What if my mother lost a child in a previous lifetime? She contracted with me in this lifetime. What if she contracted us with me in this lifetime? That she was and all three is my father, my mother, and I contracted. My father was going to leave when I was 5 years old, and my mother was going to be the sole caregiver for me, and she was going to overprotect me because she lost me once in a previous lifetime. In our contract, she was going to lose me again, even if it angered me and alienated me, because the pain of her losing me in a previous lifetime was too much for her to bear. Then I also began to understand, because of that, in terms of the pain I felt as a parent who had lost a child. So I saw all of that as being connected. And that helped me come to peace with my mother's decision to overprotect me. I got it now. I got why she did that. And it wasn't any human law explanation or traditional talk therapy. It was a 1 hour session with a holistic practitioner that helped me connect the dots for a previous session that we had around my mother's decision and my anger over her overprotecting me.
Somebody that is rooted in science, being able to also see the depths of spirituality within this experience, I think is maybe becoming more um, familiar, but I think it's rare. And I think your perspective on that is rare. And thank you for sharing all of that, because I feel like it's just something that people need to hear, and it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yep. Yeah, it could be both. I mean, one of the things that Patty taught me and one of her mentors taught her in seminary school was that it's not instead of, it's in addition to. We can
Hmm.
keep our core belief system. I believe that there's a place for science. There's always going to be a place for science. I
Hmm.
celebrate science, but I also believe there's a place for spirituality. I think you can be a holistic practitioner and appreciate science, and I think you can be a scientist and appreciate spirituality.
Hmm.
Um, I think the two together give us a very detailed and more expansive view of the human condition and human behavior. Um, and awareness than maybe either one of those by themselves could separately. So I think integration is a great thing. I think people are afraid of incorporating new beliefs, particularly if you're science-based, you're in a science community, you're incorporating spirituality. But there's a lot of scientists who believe that you can't be a scientist if you incorporate spirituality. Not a lot, but there's some that I know, which I think that's where the debunkers come in,
Mhm.
where dis, they just they just dismiss contrary perspectives without examining the literature that's been done on it, without examining those beliefs and to see how they can align. And we can pick and choose. I mean, there's so many choices for holistic practices and spiritual practices. We can pick and choose what resonates with our core belief system and integrate that and expand that. That's called critical thinking. Okay. And the other thing, the concepts I introduced of spirituality and death, these were all MDs that discovered it or experienced it.
Mhm.
Near-death experiences, past life regression therapy, reincarnation studies with children. These were all MDs that did this. Near-death experience. Eben Alexander, who was
Mhm.
a neurosurgeon, um, wrote a book called Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's view into the
Mhm.
afterlife. He had an appendix in his book where he was trying to disprove that he had a near-death experience and tried to look at alternative scientific explanations for brain functioning. He couldn't find one because he said his brain was so fully involved with bacterial meningitis, he could not have had the vivid recall and experience that are typical with near-death experiences. So these are scientists, and Bruce Grayson and Raymond Moody also have done a lot of research. They've been the pace setters with research on near-death experiences. These are all MDs that have discovered either through serendipity or maybe through their own soul contracts that they had discovered the limitations of simply Western medicine or science, and the limitations that could be kind of compensated for or supplemented by understanding practices that may not be scientifically based, but there's enough documentation, investigative evidence that indicate that these phenomena are real and need to be considered to be valid and need to be looked at seriously.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, I think that oftentimes it takes people with a deep level of higher education to present this type of knowledge and receive that credibility in order for general, the people outside of those fields to accept it and embrace it. It's like there needs to be some type of higher validation, which, that's fine. But I think that this type of experience, the one that you have had, the one that is described by many others of your peers in your profession and in others like it, is not something that is unusual outside of
No,
the scope of that. It's just not everybody's writing a book about it, right? Not everybody is
no.
sharing a deep experience about it. But I love something that you had said in a previous conversation about how you don't have to abandon your core beliefs in order to make room for new ones. And I think that when people like yourself and other um, doctors and psychologists and professionals are sharing that knowledge in a way that is absorbent in literature and podcasts like you're doing and just teaching other people about it, it resonates more.
Yeah, and we can't consensually validate somebody's spiritual experience. I can't tell an individual that a sign they experienced it didn't exist or wasn't relevant because I'm not in their skin, and I would never do that anyway.
Mhm.
But what we need to be able to do, and even if we don't believe in signs, we don't believe in mediums, and a client comes to you and wants to tell you about an experience that they had, our responsibility as coaches, our responsibility as clinicians is to understand the literature, understand what's out there so that we can have a conversation about that and objectively look at it. What I look at is what did the experience mean to that individual? Did it help them find peace? Did they learn something that could help them work through
Mhm.
grief or another challenge? What did that mean specifically to them? If I see a very different change in their demeanor, their mood, their body language, they're more engaged or more animated, then yes, that experience was meaningful and that experience was real to them. And that's all I need to know. Now, if you have an individual, obviously it's had a history of psychosis or, hallucinations, and obviously you got to rule that out. And that's where the science piece comes in. Okay. I
Mhm.
mean, that's where the science piece comes on an individual basis. But for the most part, people who experience grief aren't psychotic. They don't have that history of psychosis. These are individuals that have been leading a relatively predictable, linear, and life, and all of a sudden, catastrophic loss came and shattered their assumptive world. And we can't begin to move through grief with the same materials that built the foundation that we had of our beliefs and values and assumptions prior to loss. That foundation is going to look different based on the tools that we implement, based on the beliefs that we integrate in addition to our core beliefs. And that foundation has to be different if we're going to thrive in a world that's different without the physical presence of our loved ones.
Absolutely. I feel like I could talk to you all day. I really do. I feel like this should have been a three-part series at least, because I feel like this could just go on and get deeper and more relevant to all the listeners' lives the longer we go here. But before we have to break away from this particular conversation, I want to learn more about the Teaching Journeys podcast because this is one of the ways that you advocate for this type of knowledge and help spread what you have learned.
Well, the Teaching Journeys podcast, one of the last things I ever thought I'd be doing was a podcast. I mean, I've been on numerous podcasts before, sharing my story, sharing, a variety of different aspects about the grief experience. But I had two very persistent students at Utica University. They just would not let up. Every time I saw them, "All right, Dave, you're going to do a podcast? Are you going to do a podcast?" And I said, "You're not going to let this go, are you?" No, then we're not going to let it go. So this was about a year, and the time wasn't right. It just wasn't, the timing wasn't right for it at the
Mm.
time. But then I had individuals other than students, some that I just about said, you ought to do a podcast. You ought to do a podcast. I said, okay, universe, I hear you. So on March 31st, 2023, I did the inaugural episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast, and Patty was my first guest, and we talked about the book. We talked about how we met. We talked about the experiences, and that's in year one, the first episode. Um, and the podcast is about individuals who have transcended challenge, who have, whether it be to grief, to loss due to death, or other life challenges, and are willing to share the tools that they've learned through their challenges with my audience, who typically many of them are going through their own challenges. Um, and it's kind of evolved from there, like everything else. I have coaches, I have clinicians who have tools to share. They may not necessarily go through their own, have gone through their own traumas, and some of them but have tools or techniques to share that can help individuals go through grief. I've recently featured authors from different perspectives. So I've tried to branch into to some different areas, but with the common ground that we can all learn from everybody's experiences. So we have released, I've got 134 episodes scheduled. I've released 127. And the response has been really great. Um, I've also had individuals who have talked about, energy from plants, energies, how certain foods can detract from our energy. One podcast I just recently recorded, it's going to be scheduled with a woman um, who communicates with flowers, who talks about food energy, talks about plant-based diets and how they can improve intuition. And these are all tools that are important because I think if one of the things, all of these tools can help individuals cultivate spiritual awareness and awareness of their greater role in the world around them and greater awareness of themselves. And I think that's so important if you're going to transcend any challenge or just achieve your life goals. So it's, it's kind of been a multi-layered a category of podcasts, but with the goal being, what do you have to teach us that can help individuals gain greater spiritual awareness, gain greater clarity in terms of dealing with their challenges? That's the premise behind it. And my philosophy is that it's a shared platform. Anybody comes on the podcast, it's like it's your platform. In fact, I run it much like you run yours. It's just, which is a very comfortable fit. You ask a question, you stay out of the way so that question can be answered, and then you don't try to talk over individuals. And I'm the same way. I don't look for sound bites. I just want to have a platform where people can authentically represent themselves, their stories, and they also will have an opportunity to tell people how to get in touch with them if they have a book or books for sale. They can, I give them an opportunity to talk about how they can be purchased. So, and it's been a blast. It's been really fun. It's been another aspect of creativity that I've been able to access.
I would agree with all of that that you said, the way that it allows you to be creative. And I'd take it a step farther and say um, it has provided for a lot of my own healing. Just being able to say things out loud or have a conversation about something with somebody else, even if it isn't my own experience, but it helps me reflect on my own
Yep.
experience.
Yep.
So, I love everything you're doing with your space for sure. And it is definitely something to dive deep into. And I'm not surprised you have as many episodes as you do because it is just such a uh, deep and necessary topic, and it is broad. So there is absolutely a lot of people who can speak on everything that has influenced them and all the ways that they are healing and showing up. And for those of our listeners who don't really grasp that, like 130 some episodes in the compartment of just a year. Is that what you said? Or 2 years?
2 years.
That's still a lot. Like that's a lot. This man has done a ton of work in his platform. And that is amazing that you have just developed that like you have. And the book too. The book is something that regrettably I have not had a chance to dig into yet because again, this has been kind of a fast connection that you and I have had,
Absolutely.
meeting and then recording. So, but for sure, that's something that I will be absolutely diving into as well, because just based on what you've shared, I just feel like it's probably required reading for me.
Well, and the other thing is, anybody wants to get a really good understanding of who I am and my journey, everything's out there. There's nothing I've left unsaid. Everything is out there about my experience, the experience I had with Patty, um, that was life changing for
Hmm.
me. Um, and I can't give her. There isn't enough time in the day to give her the amount of credit that she deserves for doing what she did. She didn't know me from a bale of hay, but yet she took time out with a minister's heart and compassion and with integrity. She, and this was our contract, I believe, that we were supposed to cross paths at this particular time, to and we were supposed to, I think, help each other in different ways. And she helped me find peace and a new perspective. And perhaps I've helped her grow in ways but that's what friendship is about. It's about it's that type of where we support and we help each other grow. And um, it's just been like I said, but I asked for it, and that's one of the things I looked at. I said, told the universe I want to be where they are.
Hmm.
And as Paulo Coelho said, The Alchemist, something to the effect of when you want something, the universe will conspire to find a way for you to get it. And once I stated my intention, the universe exceeded my desire. It gave me not only spiritual knowledge, but a whole new perspective, a whole new mindset, and a whole new foundation with which I could move forward in my life again, following the most catastrophic loss of my life.
Hmm. Well, I think your request was genuine, and that's why the answer found you. I can tell by the way that you speak about your experiences with Patty that she was absolutely essential in your
Hmm.
journey. And you, I'm sure, were essential and are essential in hers as well. If she was here in this space, I think that she would probably share similar things about how it was important for her path to cross with yours. Um, Dave, again, like this has just been like 5 minutes, I feel like, but in respect of your time, tell me what you would like our listeners to go away thinking about today.
Don't be afraid to grow in new directions. Position yourself not only as a teacher, because we're all teachers, but learn. Don't be afraid to embrace new perspectives. Don't be afraid to embrace different beliefs or add different beliefs to your core belief system. Growth and expansion is what's going to help us get through any trying challenge. And in the process, progress isn't linear. A lot of times we'll take two steps forward and one step backwards, but that's the nature of the grief process. So show grace to yourself, be patient, and don't buy into anybody else's time frame to get from the raw pain of grief to acceptance that your world is permanently different, but that you're going to re-engage in it with meaning. It's going to take as long as it's going to take. Don't be pressured by anybody else's external expectations, which are based on their own beliefs.
Mhm.
Um, just buy into what you inherently believe is what you need and what tools you need to get through. And belief expansion is what I preach now in order to create awareness, particularly during the aftermath of trying times.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. This has just been a phenomenal, very enlightening conversation, and I just thank you for spending some time with me here today.
Well, Sarah, thank you for asking me to be on. I can't believe it's been an hour already. It seems like you said we just started, but thank you for creating the space that you create for your podcast and with your podcast. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure being a guest today, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
I hope so. We'll manifest that and make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.